Good evening, everyone. How are y'all doing today? We need a bigger crowd here. All right. So, welcome back. We are in the general epistles. And reminder, this time we are in 1 Peter, chapters 3 and 4. So, honestly, we're probably not going to get to chapter 4 today. Chapter 3 is chock full of good discussion-based things, and so that's okay. We probably won't get to it, to 4. Reminder, this is discussion-based. All right, so I apologize. I did not actually give y'all the homework to read this chapter, but hopefully you figured out that this was the next one. What do y'all get out of chapter 3? What are some of the main themes you get? Anyone? Yes, submission to husbands.
And I think that's appropriate since all the women are downstairs.
Yes. They left the room, so yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, there's a couple of verses after that. Right? Well, we're going to get to those too. Yes.
I know you mentioned this earlier, but I love 1 Peter 3:21.
Yes.
The anti-type baptism message.
Yes, exactly. Anybody else? Okay, so I'm going to kind of cover this chapter in two sections. The first is what Mark referred to, and so the first part of that, can someone read for us 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 4?
Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God.
Thank you. And it does actually keep going a little bit through verse 6, talking to the women specifically. Okay, so there's a lot to talk about here. First of all, what words does it use to describe this behavior, this holy behavior, this godly behavior that he's espousing here? Chaste, okay. What else? How does it describe this? How this woman should behave? I'm sorry? Conduct. How about verse 2? Accompanied by fear. My version is respectful behavior. Pure. Sorry, did I hear someone else? No, okay. Okay, so are these qualities that we as Christian men are looking for in wives? I hope so. Yes. Okay. So, a couple of things. One is, how does the woman in this case benefit from this? If she follows these instructions, how does she benefit from this? What does it basically say the outcome's going to be? Sorry, Matt. Yes, you have a good relationship with your spouse and with your Heavenly Father. And specifically, why was he saying for them to do this? Verse 1.
They may be won.
Yes, that they may be won over, right? Okay. So, is this what society teaches women to do today? No, not at all, right? In fact, pretty much polar opposite of this. Why? Why does society not like this? Yes, exactly. When it says submit unto your husbands, what did they hear? Inferior. Yes, I like that. Slavery. Anyone else? Ruled, excuse me, yes. So in other words, it sounds like they are a lesser person, a lesser position. Is that what it's saying? No. Notice too that it takes up 6 verses talking about this and what they're supposed to do. In verse 1, what does it kind of insinuate was starting to happen and they're trying to prevent? I'm not sure insinuate, it's a little more direct than that. It seems like the husband's falling away. It seems like the guy is slipping. The guy is not holding up to what he was supposed to do, or he wouldn't if she doesn't help him, right? Does that sound about right? I mean, I hate to say it, but don't men tend to veer off and do their own thing? And it's kind of the women who keep us in line, if you will, one way or the other. Now, it's through influence, right? That's exactly what this is. It's saying you need to influence your husband to be a good Christian. That is their role. Well, not their only role, but one of their roles. All right, so if society doesn't teach this, if they teach the opposite of this because they don't understand, how do we as Christians demonstrate the correct way to do this? And when I say we, I mean both men and women. Yes?
I believe if we teach the concept of having a love for God, then as we have a love for God, we have a love for our mate, recognizing that they're created in the image of God.
Yes.
And one of the things that we used to teach, or at least when I had an opportunity to do a little teaching, is the concept of finding a mate that loves God more than they love you.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you find that mate, then you find someone that's going to do everything they can to please not only God, but also you, and not be in this issue of being submissive or belittled.
Yep.
But recognizing us pulling together, there's a tremendous benefit.
Yeah, very good, very good. If you weren't able to hear, summarize, if the woman can find someone, or actually it's really both, can find a mate who loves God more than them, they automatically are going to be geared to this type of behavior, right? Did I hear somebody else start to respond to that, though? How else do we need to? Yes. Yes. Yes.
So we got to teach the whole counsel of God, which I think goes very closely to what Kim was saying.
Yes.
It's all tied together. And if we're with any subject, if we're isolating that one thing and just trying to make people understand that by itself, it doesn't make sense because that's not how God designed His Word or this world to operate.
That's exactly right.
So the wife operates in marriage, just as the husband operates in the marriage as well.
Yep. And sorry, just to summarize real quick. So we can't just look at this one verse or section of the verses, teach this and that's it, we stop, it's out of context, that type of thing. We're about to get to verse 7. But it's as a whole, right? This is all trying to reach one objective. It isn't, well, hey, this is the verse that I'm going to use, and I'm going to use this verse as a bludgeon, right? I'm sorry, Mark.
That's all right. One of the, several years ago, I had it put to me a little bit differently in that we, to your point, we tend to use this verse as a bludgeon and being submissive. Well, the other part of that is, as husbands, the buck stops here. Mm-hmm. So having your wife in submission puts you in a position of responsibility.
Yes.
As opposed to, well, you know, it's on her, she's her own person. Well, no, you as the husband are ultimately responsible for that relationship and for her well-being as well. And so there's a responsibility that's implied to the male there.
Yep, absolutely. So I don't want to get too far ahead because we're about to get to the guy's role, but you're absolutely right, and that's correct to talk about them together. By the way, that is kind of a downside. I know I'm not meaning for this to be a verse-by-verse study, but yeah, you kind of get into that, especially at this level. And in verse-by-verse studies, you start really drilling down and looking narrowly, and you do have to look at the bigger picture. Yes?
Happen if the wife is there.
Yes.
And in my own family, that happened with my dad. With my mother constantly going to church, taking us boys to church. And all. I was 15 before I ever saw my dad in church more than twice. And when he was baptized on there. But they had a thing in Chattanooga called Know the Bible. And they would take, it was 4 preachers, and they would just take any kind of phone call out there. And he let her play that every Sunday. He learned the Bible from that.
Yeah.
On there, and turned out to, and lived a very Christian life after that. But that is such a strong point of that on there. And that the whole thing about being submissive, I think, is really, I don't like that word there. I don't know what to use, because it means really that you're equal.
Yeah.
And there, now, you got different responsibilities, but you're equal.
Yeah.
And when you think about the wife on that, in the modern world, you think about that, you can't say, well, he's got his right or she's got her right. It's they out with both sides of it.
And with equal value. But that's a very good real-world example of exactly what they're talking about here. The other is men can be hard-headed, stubborn, things like that. I love the billboard. It says something like, men die at such and such rate because they won't go to the doctor, and someone spray painted beneath it, we're fine. Yeah, that's kind of half. There's some truth in that. So by the woman influencing in this manner, it's not them, nagging and beating them over the head and all that. It's showing the example, just like men and women should be showing a Christian example to everyone and getting him to follow along. Okay, so I want to point out the women, there were 6 verses. The men get 1 because apparently our attention span is a little bit shorter. All right, so can someone read for us 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7?
Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as a weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so I like, Mark, what you were saying. The way it was phrased to me when I was at Mississippi State going through premarital counseling, and we were talking about, I don't think this was the set of verses he used, but we were using a different section, but still similar thoughts. Let's say you have a ship, okay? You got a great big battleship. They don't exist anymore. That's very sad. But anyway, you got a great big battleship. How many captains are there on that ship? 1. If that captain, it's night, he's off ship, off shift, not ship. That would be bad. But he's off shift, so he's asleep, and something happens. Is he clear? No big deal? Nope. It's still on him. That's to Mark's point, right? You can only have 1 captain, but he is responsible. So in verse 7, it says, live with your wives in an understanding way. Do you think that was chosen at random? Or do you think that guys can tend to be not understanding? Maybe a little impatient? Men and women think differently, right? A lot of times it's a little hard to understand. One of the best examples, I think, is that, your wife comes to you with a problem and she says, hey, here's my problem. And you're like, okay, well, these are the steps. We're going to fix it. We're going to do this, this, and this. And that never works. I still don't understand it. That's not the answer, though, right? But we need to be understanding. We need to understand that, hey, what they're looking for is different. And that's not just with a particular problem they have, but that's throughout life. That is understanding what they need and supporting them. All right. So thoughts on this section?
There's a couple of words right there that tend to go against each other, I think. So it tells wives, be submissive to your husbands. But then it tells the husbands, give honor to your wives.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, they almost seem like they play against each other a little bit. And
Yes.
that just gives you an indication that it's not a boss, it's not a boss-employee relationship.
Yep. So let's say there was a king, right? And you're supposed to submit to the king. Okay, all right, we understand that concept. Does the king honor you? Well, okay, maybe in the case of the Sunday morning lesson, I could talk about that a little bit. But in general, it's you're honoring the king, right? And to your point, Mark, the husband here is honoring the person who is supposed to be submitting to them, right? So it's a balancing, okay? Yes?
I know we're not looking at the Pauline epistles, but
That's fine.
it's hard to view this in isolation from Ephesians,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think God created man first in anticipation of the responsibility and accountability that is placed on the man.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so often we abdicate
Yes.
that responsibility for whatever reason. We abdicate the responsibility that we've been given in ways that we shouldn't. And I think by understanding what Paul wrote to the Ephesians regarding this relationship, we understand, hopefully, much more the responsibility that we have and the example that we are expected to follow in the relationship that Christ has with his bride, the church.
I could not possibly agree more. I like your word choice there, abdicate, as in you have a position, that this is your position in life, and you have left it, right? Now, maybe it's a formal abdication. You signed the letter, I have abdicated the throne, that type of thing. But what does society do now? Does society value men? No, not at all. There are so many things that society says, well, you shouldn't be masculine. You shouldn't be a man. Well, I think giving the benefit of the doubt, a lot of them are trying to say you shouldn't do the bad things that men are sometimes known to do. Well, yeah, I agree to that. I think we all agree to that. But they kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater. They're saying, so therefore, since some men do these things sometimes, you shouldn't be a man. We should all be the same. And some are trying to take that really literal, but they want to make it where, hey, there's no difference at all between men and women. Well, there are, right? That doesn't mean that every man is Arnold Schwarzenegger or every woman is I don't know who, but, in general, the men tend to think certain ways. They tend to be stronger, as it was pointing out in this verse. Things like that. God put us here for a reason. We need to not abdicate that reason. We have responsibilities. And I want to think, are we teaching our kids this? I honestly, this is my personal opinion, I honestly think we do a pretty decent job of teaching our daughters. And I would say even society a little bit in teaching our daughters. And hey, you need to not be a doormat, things like that. I think in general, we do pretty good about that. What do y'all think about us teaching our sons, though? Us teaching our youth? And obviously society isn't doing a good job, so it's on us, absolutely. Do you think we are always doing a good job at that? How do you think we could do it better?
it's like we just expect everybody to learn from their mistakes, rather than like maybe with girls and daughters, it's more of like a formal, oh, we need to make sure that before she leaves the house, she knows how to defend herself, or, you know, whatever the things are.
Yeah.
But for guys, it's just like, you know, you just kind of have to ram your head into a wall before you realize
Yes.
that's not a good idea.
You expect them to learn by osmosis, right? And don't get me wrong, kids are sponges. They're going to see the behavior you demonstrate, and they tend to go in that direction. But I've caught myself so many times over the years realizing, you know, I've never actually taught my son this. And I mean, some core basic principles. So, for example, when my son started driving, you know, I mean, he'd been driving, I don't know, months, and all of a sudden I realized, hey, Will, if you see blue lights behind you, what do? And we walk through. Well, you pull over. You put your hands on the wheel. You roll down the window. And, you know, like basic things that no one ever taught me. Again, so my parents were divorced when I was 12. So, yeah, I had to learn through osmosis secondhand. So that was a little different. So let's think about that situation. Okay, so I was 12 years old, didn't have a father. But I had a church, didn't I? What is our role as men in the church in a situation like that?
Well, I think first off, we have to be fathers. And so to your point,
Yes.
we have a responsibility to our own children, all of our children, not just our sons, but certainly our
Yep.
sons. To your point, masculinity has become kind of almost a no-no, and that, you know, there's a positive masculinity that we need to teach.
Yes.
But to the same token, if there's without treading on someone else's family, if there's an opportunity to step up and mentor, then we certainly should. And there's components of that within Lads to Leaders, for instance, where, you know, we take, and in most cases, the men, you know, young men with fathers and everything, but there's an additional opportunity to help teach them things that men should know.
Yes, exactly. I don't know if y'all have listened to Jordan Peterson. He's a psychologist, but he also he talks. He has a lot of books and things like that. One of his tenets is basically that boys, young men, that you have to train them and teach them to do, and he is Christian in one sense, but you have to teach them to use their powers for good. That's not exactly the way we'd say it as Christians, but it's close. Basically, they can go either way. Now, he's thinking good, bad, rather than, you know, evil, but still, you have to teach them. You have to direct them in that way, or else you will get bad, you will get evil. And that's one of his main things about current society is we basically leave boys on their own. Society has said that men aren't important, so the fathers leave, they abdicate. When the father leaves, all of a sudden you have a cycle, because now the boy's growing up, he has no role models, and so he ends up, maybe he gets married, maybe not, has kids, he abdicates, right? And so it's just continuing. Yes, go ahead.
An extreme example I'll share with my little brother worked for a nonprofit in Texas. And their mission was to take men who actually had to attend their classes as appointed by the court,
Okay.
in order for them to be able to see their children. And he said it was almost without fail that these men were in this cycle because this was the way their fathers were and their grandfathers were, and this was the only way they knew how to be men.
Yeah.
And that included abuse, It included, a failure, the baby mama, no respect for women, no
Yep.
respect for their wives or girlfriends or whoever. And he says it was, and so basically what they were doing is taking these men and giving them a positive example.
Good.
And teaching them to be men,
Yeah.
because they didn't have that.
Yeah. A lot of times in society, they are proud of, having kids with different women and all this. Because they haven't been taught the Christian values. Okay, so we are about to leave this paired section. Any other thoughts, questions, comments that we haven't gotten to? Yes.
That scares me. Is the reason there's a change at the Southeastern Children's Home from abused teenagers to the other is the fact the government has decided that it's not important that those people have the training and all like they get, like we do with a set of parents in every home with the kids, certain steps they've got to go through, and if they don't, they back up and punishment, and things like that, but they also gain a lot of advantages the other way. And the government has come out and says, no way. It's got, you got to do it in the foster parent type thing, which
Right.
puts the smaller kids and the older kids, they get left out again.
Yep.
And that's what's sad on there. It's just amazing over the years how many kids I've saw, particularly the boys, that come in and they were just belligerent about everything. But before they left 6 months or a year later, there was a totally different child because there was somebody there that cared for them in a male capacity.
Yeah, they had that stability there.
But the same thing works on the other side, though, if there's no mother there.
Absolutely, yes. You have to have both. I was going to say, the fact that it is a pair, you've got the mother and father figure there in the home. Okay, any other comments, questions before we move? Yes. Okay. Yes.
Huge. I mean, above anything else, we're brothers and sisters in Christ. And so that also brings into this whole discussion everything else that's talked about how do we treat our brothers and sisters in Christ in terms of unity and love, and all of those principles inherently apply here because that's how we treat our brothers and sisters, and we are fellow heirs and brothers and sisters, and we'd be hugely wrong for us to go to worship or a fellowship meal or something and treat other people like that while we don't treat our wives like that.
Yes, exactly. So we should treat all Christians like that, treat the fellowship like that. So excellent transition into verse 8. So can someone read for us 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 through 13?
Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another, love as brothers, be tenderhearted and be courteous, not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you were called to this, that you may inherit a blessing. For he who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. And who is he who will harm you if you become followers of what is good?
Thank you. So this is exactly what you're getting to, that we talked about the husband-wife relationship, but now it basically expounds upon it, but it also extends it to the fellowship. So I chose as kind of to sum up, verse 8, be harmonious, sympathetic, loving, compassionate, and humble. Okay? So first of all, that is similar to what we were talking about, I believe it was last week. These are things that apply to interpersonal relationships, right? Is it always easy to be harmonious, sympathetic, loving, compassionate, humble? when we're dealing with other people, especially other people who have wrong opinions, right? Other opinions, sorry. So these words that they use, harmonious, sympathetic, loving, compassionate, humble, and of course it goes on in other verses. How do we show that? How do we get to that place?
This is where I think, again, the application of chapters gets in our way.
Yep.
You know, throughout chapter 2 is really all about submission. He doesn't always use that word.
Yeah.
But he does start to along 13, 14, 15, 16 of chapter 2. So it's a continuation of that thought. And
Yes.
all of these just become ways in which we are submissive. If you're courteous, you are submissive to the other person. If you are loving, you are being submissive. If you are a wife, you are being taught to be submissive to your husband. And in fact, the verse about the husbands, it throws in that word likewise. Right? So I think the husbands are themselves being taught to be submissive.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, to my eye, that concept of submission is in fact the thread that runs through this entire,
Yes.
almost the entire book, actually.
Yes, I agree. There's a couple of sections, like the one we're about to get to. It's not a tangent. That's not the correct term, but I think it's a different lesson we get to in the next section. But absolutely, the book really is about, or the book, epistle, the letter, is about interpersonal relationships and how to behave as a Christian. So one of the ways that an elder at a congregation I was at a couple of decades ago phrased it was that if you always view the other person in the congregation as better than yourself, if you have that humility, then these things kind of all fall in place, right? If you look up to, if you see the good in the other person, it makes these things easier. All right, so if we do this, how does God benefit from us following these instructions?
And you know, this whole area right here you're talking about, as 25 plus years as an elder, I found that an elder, you're held higher regard in these areas than the average person is.
Yep.
And I've used this many times when somebody come to me about something and say, wait a minute, that's your responsibility. You got the same responsibility I've got as an elder on there. But that's something that, I don't know, Mark, I'm sure you've run into that over the years too, that's a big point in the Church of Christ now. I mean, a lot of think the elders are responsible for doing that.
Right.
But
When it's us who's supposed to go to that person if you have an issue, yes.
instead of realizing they have a certain amount of obligations to perform these same things, that doesn't apply. I agree. This ought to be a part of what you got to have to be an elder. I think that's part of the duties of an elder.
Sure.
On there, but it's not their sole responsibility. That's one that they can't pass. Somebody can't pass on to.
And when that person does go directly to the person that they have contention with, they're supposed to do it in this manner, right? With love, with humility, compassion. Yes.
And we tend to, and this, I believe, is speaking to the church and within the church.
Yes, it is, yes.
So Romans 12, verse 18 says, as much as it depends on you, live peaceably with all men.
Correct.
And so this passage carries beyond the church, and think about if the whole world abided by that mantra.
Yes.
Where, you know, it's not a matter of, well, just my little group. It's a matter of everybody that I come in contact with is gonna think, wow, that was a really great experience.
Yep, exactly. If you want to grow the congregation, then we need to live this, right? People need to see this in us when they visit. And I say visit, they need to see that when they're here, when they're members.
They need to see it when we're out there.
Yes, correct.
They need to say, wow, what is that guy got, and how do I get some of that?
Yes. Something needs to be different.
Yes.
Yeah. You need to be able to be in a meeting and be thinking, that person, something seems different about that person. Okay. So I was asking, how does God benefit from that, from this type of behavior? I think growing the congregation, right, it's going to naturally lead more people to Christ, to your point, both demonstrating it outside the congregation and inside. If we are all harmonious, then it's much easier to stay on the straight and narrow, right? Because there isn't contention that is driving you. It's just one more reason, one more excuse to not stay on the straight and narrow, right? All right, so what about the people? How do we benefit if we behave like this? Bob?
Well, one thing is the quote-unquote church experience, just us being together is a whole lot more pleasant
Yes.
under these situations than otherwise. But also our worship to God is better because our mind isn't full of all this other stuff. It's more where it should be.
Yes, our mind is more peaceful. Yes.
And I believe if we have those characteristics, God will bless the efforts, and we'll see the growth.
Yes.
To Mark's point, we should be lights in the workplace that we work. There should be something different about us. Attitudes, jokes we participate in, jokes we don't participate in. How do we walk? How do we interact? When everybody else is crying blues, throwing the boss under the bus, are we in that group or do we stand different? And that's the way that we show the fact that we are a child of God.
Yeah. So hey, can y'all think of someone that you know who is just always in a good mood, always happy? You can't pick Keith. All right, you got to pick somebody else because he's too obvious of a target. That's the type of person that we're going to go through struggles. But if we can be that person, be compassionate, loving, humble, that will help us. There's still more to do, but help us be more like that. Yes.
I haven't succeeded in it now, but if you're like that, it makes it easier for you to approach people
Yes.
about the church and talk to them about it, because you can't let it hurt you when somebody says, I'm just not interested.
Yes.
On there, that type of thing. You just cannot let that be a deterrent on there. And you still got to be nice. You got to be gentle with them, and this type as you go through there, So it has for God's benefit, it has a great value because we should be planting the seed by doing that at that point. I mean, every chance we get there, we need to talk to people about it now. And we're all, I don't think there's anybody in here can say, okay, we're great at that on there, but you can become better.
We can get better. That's right. Okay, so for the sake of time, I think we are going to move to the next section. Can someone read for us still 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 through 22?
For Christ also suffered once for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive by the Spirit, by whom also he went and preached to the spirits in prison, who formerly were disobedient, when once the divine long-suffering waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 souls, were saved through water. There is also an antitype, which now saves us, baptism, not the removal of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, angels and authorities and powers having been made subject to him.
Thank you. Okay, so this does follow, it's all one letter, right? But this section, I think, is good to study in its own right. One of the things that I have gotten into discussions with a lot of people is baptism required for salvation? And you get all sorts of answers. You get all sorts of answers about, well, it's a good thing to do, or it's a sign that you were, or all sorts of answers. So the reason I like this is I was having a discussion with somebody. He was an engineer. And I said, okay, sake of argument, let's say that God did require baptism for salvation. How would you have God write that out for you? He said, well, baptism saves you. So I said, well, the Bible actually says that. He says, I don't believe you. So we were at lunch at the time, but this was before the days of cell phones. But anyway, we went back and I showed him the verse. It still didn't work, but I think it is a good thing to keep in your mind. Hey, different people come at doctrinal issues in different lights, right? They've been taught different things. It's not like they've all been taught the same thing. Maybe they haven't been taught at all, but that's a little different. So it helps to understand where the Bible teaches baptism in different ways, in different words. In my personal opinion, not that that's worth anything, I like the reading of this. I think this is the clearest verse there is on baptism. That's easily debatable, but I just like the way it is worded here. Now, the New American Standard Version, corresponding to that, baptism now saves you, not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God for a good conscience. In other words, okay, the baptism is saving you. It has nothing to do with a physical, like, dirt removal, just clearing that up. But it's part of the appeal to God. This is how you call upon God, right? All right, so from that, what other doctrines does this preclude regarding baptism specifically? So think about some false teachings about baptism. What does this verse teach against? Maybe verse is if you need it.
I think it was just
Immersion?
It's hard to say he's not talking about immersion, he's talking about.
Yes. It's a lot of water, right? I think of Noah, right? That was a flood. How about an appeal to God of a good conscience? Infant baptism. How is the infant, how is he making that conscious decision, right? He has not been taught who God is. He could not understand who God is at this point. Anything else? Any other thoughts?
People, and they think you're saved beforehand. And there's no way that baptism does nothing but get you wet.
Yeah, exactly. And if this is what it says, if baptism now saves you, why would you wait until you stack up 5 people?
That's right.
It'd be more convenient, but does that have anything to do with what we are supposed to do? Okay? Okay, so I think that's what I really wanted to cover tonight. Any final thoughts, questions before we end? Okay, let's close out with a word of prayer, please. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this time that you've given to us to come and to study your word. We hope that everything has been according to your word. And please be with us throughout this devotional time as we go out into the world so that we can be a light to the world. It's in Christ's name that we pray. Amen.